Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interviewed titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guests today are entrepreneurs and the managing partners and founders of Trivium Point Advisory, a business consulting firm strengthening businesses with an emphasis on execution. Please welcome Ron and George. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Certainly. So what I like to do is, in order to help our entrepreneurs and business leaders out there to get a better understanding of where would I start from, right? I like to go back in time, go back to how we started, how we developed, what were some of the things that hit us over the head and got us to be where we are today. Both of you had entrepreneurs as parents and ran businesses, so obviously that had a big impact on you. Could you share, either George or Ron, start sharing your experience of how that impacted you today?
Sure. So, growing up, my dad initially was working for an organization, traveled a ton when we were little kids, and I think not having control of his destiny really led him to get into his own world and start his own company. And I watched him from the time I was really, probably in like fourth or fifth grade. I remember vividly him traveling for himself versus for someone else. And then watched as I matured and his business grew, what it really meant to have your own business, pay for your own health insurance, the paycheck comes in when dad works and, worry about all those things. So it was really interesting and unique for me to experience that as a kid and be observant of it.
What kind of business did he have? So
my dad's a mechanical engineer by trade. So he repairs computer controlled machinery, programs them, and pretty much traveled the world doing it. I remember growing up, Dad would come home, speak Korean to me or Japanese because he just spent 2 or 3 weeks somewhere. So it was a pretty unique experience watching him go through all that stuff.
That's really cool. And what about you, Ron?
So both my parents actually had 2 separate companies on their own. So going through that experience of watching both my parents be able to start and start another one was always fun to watch. But I'll never forget, being younger and, waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning, walk past the kitchen table with lights on, bills everywhere, pens and pads with them just trying to figure stuff out. So it was always nice to watch. But I think the biggest thing that was the most, kind of influential in my life was, my dad never missed a lacrosse game. So, practices start at 3, end at 5. He was there at every single one. So I always knew he was doing something right. But I think the most important thing is that there were some struggles that they went through. And I think that's kind of where George and I said, hey, we've seen what our parents did right. We've seen a lot of things that they've done wrong. So let's try to be able to pass that forward to, clients and friends.
To clients and friends, yeah. And I mean, so that right there is exactly why we're doing this show, is for the entrepreneurs and the business leaders that are listening. And when I say business leaders, these are the people that are maybe working for someone right now and they're climbing the corporate ladder and going into the C-suite. And then, of course, our entrepreneurs who are starting small businesses. And I think a lot of shows, they focus on the successes and how we got there. And we're going to definitely focus on the success. But you said something in there about your parents and the struggles.
Yep.
And I'd like to kind of hear a little bit more about the struggles and then maybe how they overcame them.
Absolutely. So just to be very clear, both my parents, the 2 businesses that they did have ended up going under. So I'm very, on the front line of that. And to be honest, I think the biggest struggle that they had is they never had that one person sitting on their side of the table really being an advocate for them and navigating the different obstacles. They always had people kind of popping in and out of their world saying, hey, you should do this or you should do that. But nobody ever was being able to speak their language. And I just think that was really eye-opening for us, being able to watch that.
It's interesting that you bring that part up about the person on their side of the table, because George, you mentioned in your bio about having a business coach.
Yes.
And having somebody, obviously an advocate for you or somebody helping challenge you a little bit. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So early in my career, I'm very much big into getting feedback and being mentored and learning. But what I learned early on, I forgot what book it was that I was reading. It said you probably always want to get some advice outside of the world you're in, right? Because typically the advice you're getting inside your organization or your industry has some kind of influence and impact on the person that's giving you the advice. And it's not really crystal clear, and it could have some influence, right? So I went out and found a coach and completely disassociated with my industry, completely disassociated with whether I was successful or not,
Right.
or how I took his or her advice and executed it. And I hired my first business coach in my, really my mid-20s before I could even afford to hire a business coach or really even know what a business coach was, Michael. But that person helped me frame up where I started my leadership career, which was like I realized that I got more out of watching people become successful and being a part of that versus my own actual success. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I turned the corner right around 25, 26 years old to look at this leadership track, knowing that I had passion in my industry, loved it, loved serving people. And then it was this whole like epiphany of, wow, like you could actually make a career out of leading. You don't typically see that because usually the sexiest person in the organization is, the number one guy or gal.
Right.
And that's not always the person that's leading the charge. And that became completely transparent to me in hiring my first coach.
Wow. Yeah. I also have a business coach.
Awesome.
And it's kind of funny that when you said the mid-20s or that you hired it, the person, the business coach, I was thinking in my mind, I'm going, well, we just fast forwarded to where you are today when I asked you that question, and I'm like, wait a second, that's way back.
Yeah.
The business coach. So you've had this for a while. So I mean, I like to try to do this a little like in an order of start, but right from the start, you had a business coach, so you knew immediately. And I guess maybe did you and Ron know each other at the time?
Not at that time, no.
Okay.
Ron and I met a little over 10 years ago now. So at that time, I didn't know Ron. I was actually in the business, working with two other individuals, and the coach kind of appeared to us, was referred to us, and I took the leap of faith then. But no, Ron and I didn't know each other at that time.
When the student's ready, the teacher comes.
That's right.
The teacher appears, right?
And it's been an evolution, Michael. I mean, there's been two other coaches in the middle, right?
Sure.
So you kind of outgrow the person,
need, yeah.
and then you find the next person, and then you find the next person. So I think that influence will always be in my life.
Yep. I just got to hit this because I just heard it stop. Okay. So on that like business coach, so you both kind of have this mindset of I need somebody on my side, I guess. So when I'm thinking about these stories that you're sharing with me, and I'm thinking about our entrepreneurs and business leaders that are listening, I'm just thinking that how can we help them understand the importance of that, and through your story, obviously the coaching, and then a little bit again back to your family's failed businesses, I guess,
sure. Yeah.
Is the importance of learning when you don't have somebody on your side and how to seek out that help.
Well, first off, I hope mom and dad don't listen to this.
Well, obviously they taught their son and their family something very important, because I mean my father's had businesses too,
sure.
That have failed or succeeded, So I mean, and I think I just had an entrepreneur on yesterday, and we were just talking about the success rate of a business, and it's really low. So I think it's like just amazing that they went out and tried.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting that we take a look at the coach, and I always like to joke around saying it's really difficult to see the label on the jar when you're stuck inside of it, right? And I pretty much call my father religiously on the way home, right? And he has a contracting company now, and he's constantly telling me about the struggles that he's going through. And it's almost like, my dad, you're literally mimicking the meeting I had right before I called you. And I don't think he has the ability to see that until he says it out loud. Mm-hmm. And there's usually 2 or 3 questions that I can ask him where he's like, I see where the path you're taking me down here. But sometimes people just need to talk it out loud. And when you're that early stage entrepreneur, you're everything, right? You're the CEO, the CFO, the bookkeeper, the landscaper, you're it all.
Sales, marketing. Yep.
Exactly. So sometimes it's nice to just be able to vent without having that person have an alternative agenda. And I think that's really where George mentioned the coach piece is outside the industry, unique perspective. And I've always given George a lot of credit is that he actually goes to outside industry conferences to just say, hey, like what are other people actually doing that aren't just in that specific world that we're living in? That's
really cool. I want to go to the outside industry conferences, but a quick question then. So are you your dad's coach and he's your coach?
So I always say my 2 toughest clients are by far my mother and my father. So I get to a certain point and then, both of our personalities are the same. So when I hear the voices and the decibels go up a little bit, I go, all right, Pops, we'll end it here.
Right. Yeah. you figure it out. And then one more thing on the coaching side is you also mentioned something, and I'm curious to find out if this happens to you, George. I'm sure it does. Is exactly what you just said. Is I'll have some issues that I'm working out with somebody else or whatever, and then I'll say it out loud to my coach, and she'll like look at me and she'll go like, you kind of just worked that out on your own, but when I say it to her, it's almost like she validates that what I said was correct, I guess. I don't know if you experienced that with your coach.
Oh, certainly, Michael. I would tell you that there's probably been 4 or 5 large decisions I've made in my professional life, and I probably knew the answer.
Right.
And talking it out and really just having a sounding board. Like,
yes. Am
I thinking this through correctly? Am I looking at this from the right angle? Am I too emotional on this? So I think I always, your instincts are there and you probably have the right thought or the answer to your point, but it's always good when someone with no influence on the outcome validates that for you. And that's been big for me in my career for sure.
It is nice, that objective person. So you mentioned that you go to outside industry events. Again, when I'm thinking about our leaders and our entrepreneurs out there that are listening, I think that that's really important. When you step outside of your industry, it's like you said, the label inside the jar. I kind of like that analogy. That was kind of cool. It's get outside the jar, right? And start going down to different aisles in the grocery store, since we'll stay on that topic. And I think there's a grocery store thing in there for you anyway.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear more about that.
Yeah. So in the coaching I've done, one of the coaches shared with me, like, there's more than one way to get to the grocery store, right?
Right.
The outcome might be the same when you get inside, but there's multiple ways to get there. And in an industry that we're in that's highly regulated from a compliance perspective, no one was going to these, social media or marketing conferences that were, really starting to get popular and popularized by people like Gary Vaynerchuk and so forth, right? So I would, jump on a plane, leave my family for 3 days, shell out thousands of dollars to go to these conferences to get exposure to what really awesome professionals were doing, take back whatever I could and apply it to the current world I was in, but also know that there was this bigger picture in mind. And I wanted that intellectual capital so that I could execute it when the time was right for my bigger picture, which is what we're doing today. So not only did it help me climb the ladder where I was, but it's also ultimately prepared me for the things we're doing today.
Yeah.
So A, money well spent. B, it's always nice to get away in February and go to Miami. But at the end of the day, it's prepared me and Ron for what we're doing today. So I always wanted to make sure we had that.
I have a budgeting question that we'll table for 1 second. But,
sure.
But Ron, when George gets back from these conferences, what kind of energy do you see from him?
So it's usually a notepad with a lot of scribbles on it. And he's like, I need you in the conference room. And I think this is where, from a partnership perspective, George and I work really well, is that George is always very 30,000 foot view. And I'm probably more like 20,000 foot view. So he can go and jump on a whiteboard and say, this is what we need to be doing. And my mindset is like, all right, how are we going to execute on that? And usually my job is to say, all right, let me take that big idea. Let me see how it's applicable in our specific world. And then I can come back and say, hey, did I articulate this the right way? And then it's just on our job to be able to share that vision with our staff and our individuals that we lean on to ultimately take it to that 2,000 foot view.
So everybody can understand what's on that notepad.
Yeah, we do a lot of whiteboard sessions.
And I would assume a lot of high energy coming in the room from that, right?
Yeah, I just think that, when you come back with ideas, or if you're like me sometimes in the middle of the night and you just have this crazy idea at 2 o'clock in the morning, you have to get it on paper. Sometimes it's in the morning when I'm working out and I don't know why it happens that way, but that's where the best stuff comes from. And I think the big disconnect that causes people to take that really good idea and actually execute on it is sometimes it just dies in the moment of wherever it's thought. It's never written down, or that piece of paper never goes anywhere. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest part of it.
It's funny, we in our kind of like pre-talk, we were talking about Jerry Seinfeld, and a Seinfeld episode sticks in my mind where he was at a hotel and he woke up in the middle of the night and wrote a joke on a piece of paper, and the maid came and cleaned it up, and he was freaking out and going crazy. And as a high school kid, I didn't understand it, but right now with what you're saying is like, when you have that, so for those who are listening right now, when you have that idea, when you have that thought pop in your head, act on it, right? Take the pen out, write it down, but take it another step further and call somebody and start taking action with it, right?
Absolutely. For sure. And go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, one of the big takeaways from one of the coaches I use currently, he shared with me, keep a couple note cards on your bedside table. And if you got something, you can't fall asleep because something's on your mind, write it down.
Write it down, yeah.
Pick it up the next morning, go through it. And I started to do that, maybe not as old school as putting a index card next to my bed, because probably one of my sons would take it and rip it up and have some fun with it. But just pick up your phone and throw something in the notes section.
Right.
So definitely, I completely agree with Ron. Like, most of those ideas die in the moment because they're not put on paper or put somewhere where they're in front of your face consistently.
That's right. It's the whole idea of writing your goals and keeping them in front of you.
Sure.
The reason why I want to go back to the budget and why I wanted to get the energy of how you gauge the energy of when you get back from these conferences is entrepreneurs, and you guys know this because we'll talk a little bit. We're going to get into your business in a second, but entrepreneurs are on a shoestring budget, right? Sure. And so sometimes we see these conferences or these big events, and we're going, well, I can't afford that. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, it's almost like you can't afford not to go.
Correct.
So and I'm not asking how much you spend or anything, but kind of just along those lines of, I'll share with you guys a quick story and see if it maybe leads to something for you in terms of the budgeting. For me, I had a huge awakening, let's call it, right? Where I had a moment where I was stuck in the same rut, constant rut, and I was like, I got to do something different. I was watching Netflix and I got to see Tony Robbins' I'm Not Your Guru episode.
Great episode.
A series, movie.
Yep.
And it was an inspiring movie. Of course, I knew who he was prior to that. But in that moment of watching it, I was like, I need to do something. I need to take action. And I remember I called them up the next day. I was ready to hire a business coach. In the terms of budget, I really couldn't afford it. But I was able to afford his tapes. And so I was like, you know what, $700, I'm going to get the mastery coach and all these other things, and I'm going to sit down and listen to them and write and really take them in as an investment of $700. And I did, and it's been a complete turnaround for me since that day. So as a small example, I'm just interested because I know these conferences could be thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested in kind of like the ROI and how you feel about them.
So it's funny, Michael, I could share with you, a pretty unique story on just the coaching and some of these events. I've always spent before I had when it came to these things. Even as my income levels grew, I always spent above. I'm sure at some point my wife might listen to this. She had no idea at one point I was paying a business coach a pretty hefty 5-figure sum on a monthly basis. Mm-hmm. And I went to work every day making sure I figured out how to cover that so that I didn't burden my family or worry Sarah with that monthly figure.
Right.
That investment today probably 4 or 5x my income. And that was almost a mortgage payment for us at the time, Michael, on a monthly basis. But some of these conferences, for sure, that went on Visa and MasterCard, and it probably, as financial advisors by trade, is not the smartest thing to advise someone.
Right.
But at the time, I knew that was an investment in not only myself, but in what I was trying to do to help others that I was responsible for. So to me, it was a non-negotiable to spend the money, even if it was debt. Since then, all that debt's cleaned up, and now those things can be paid for in cash flow. But at the end of the day, I've always spent on myself before I could afford to.
Yeah.
And it was just a risk I was willing to take, and most successful entrepreneurs and business owners have done that. And that's how I looked at it, and that's how I view it today.
Yeah.
I think the challenge with business owners when they take a look at spending money on things is if you really think about it, every decision they make on where money goes is just less money in their pocket, right? So when you think about hiring someone, some business owners take a look at it. Well, if I hire someone for $50,000, I'm just making $50,000 less now.
Right.
If I go to this conference, I now have $5,000 less in my pocket. So really, you have to just kind of reverse engineer it, in our opinion, is to say, all right, what do I ultimately need to keep the lights on, food on the table? Every dollar above that is getting reinvested either in human capital to the business or something that will return 10x on that. Mm-hmm. And that's where you start to say, wow, there's a completely different budget in mind, not necessarily, well, I need to go buy that new car or do all the things that we ultimately want to do, set that aside and really focus on kind of the bigger picture.
Right. I like how you laid that out. And I'm of the same philosophy. I have a over 10-year-old car, and I have a business coach, and I have a marketing assistant, and it's because of that self-investment, because I know it's going to get me to the next level. I want to introduce your company now because I think with what you just said, I do have a question in there, and I think that that's something that you guys do in your role at Trivium Point. Trivium Point.
You got it.
And you guys just started this company.
We did.
You did just start this company, and you're business consultants. And just staying on the topic of what we just were on as a business consultant, and in your website, you talk about how you want to help these companies become stronger companies and execute on their plans. And so on the topic of budgeting, because that's definitely in their plan,
Sure.
and what you just mentioned there of isolating these things, is that something that you go over with these business owners of how to execute and how to 10X and not be so stingy? I mean, I guess I could say, with their dollars?
Yeah, I think that there's two things that you have to take a look at from like a cash flow perspective, which is ultimately what you're referring to is, A, where's the money going, right? So a lot of businesses will have leakage in there, meaning just money's just floating out and they don't even know it's going. But most importantly, a lot of people just need the framework to say, can I afford to do this?
Right.
And I think what COVID taught business owners was that is now the most important thing. Right? Can I afford to keep these people on payroll? Can I afford to stay in the building that I'm in?
Right.
Can I afford to just keep this business? So a lot of the times we'll spend is really looking under the hood of what the business is and validate for them the decisions that they ultimately want to do from a financial perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think innately some business owners just aren't that strong in that area. And that's where we come in.
I have an interesting follow-up question to that without divulging who it is, but I know a business that unfortunately is closing at this time, and part of the process was because of COVID, because of certain things like that. But part of the process, we saw that we had to cut expenses in certain places, which then we had to get rid of employees. And then to me, as soon as we made that decision, I was like, the writing's on the wall. As soon as we get rid of that employee, we're not going to be able to continue this business. And eventually it ended up closing. So I just wonder, when we're talking about this of like, can you afford this? And then it's almost like what I was thinking while you were saying that too. I was thinking, can you not afford, right? How do you help a business owner make that decision of looking at it and going, I don't know how I'm going to pay that person, but you know from your experience that if you don't pay that person, you're not going to have a business. How do you help that business owner or entrepreneur figure that out?
I think there's probably two parts to it, Michael. One is we find ourselves being more psychologists to some extent with the business owner, because a lot of that's mindset at that point, right? And it's how committed are you to it? There, as a business owner, most of the time there's always ways to find the money if things are set up and structured correctly. So it's more, can I walk the individual through mentally the ability to do it and get over the hump of the money. Sometimes we've run into that there really isn't the money to do it, and that's unfortunate. Right. But that's kind of where my partnership with Ron comes in. Is there's two of us in the room. One of us takes the role as the shrink, and the other takes the role as the the CFO. And our ability to walk the person through it from a financial perspective, and then from an emotional perspective, helps them get to the finish line ultimately. So that's been our experience with that. But to your point, you most of the time you can't afford not to do it.
Right. Yeah, I think, like you said, talking through the process. Again, speaking to our entrepreneurs and business leaders out there, it's you got to talk through the process. And I really like what you just said, because it's been said to me too, which is there's money there, and you just got to find it. And I'm reading right now the book about Google, and they're talking about the founders. What they talk about is coming to a meeting with an idea as a founder, as a CEO. You come to the meeting with an idea of what you want to do, but first listen to everybody else. And it's not about your idea. It's about finding what the right idea is or what the right solution is. And when you come to the table with that mindset, like you said, then maybe you do find the money.
Absolutely. And, even Ron and I, in some of the decisions we're looking to make at Trivium today, like we've even had discussions to say, all right, well, we'll take less to make this work. And that puts pressure on us personally, right? But at the end of the day, we know that's the best thing for the enterprise, which will ultimately mean it's the best thing for our clients.
Right.
So we walk ourselves through the similar process.
So now you start this company, all right? So you started September 2020.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yes.
So you were working somewhere else, and you decide to start a company in 2020, which is COVID, every quarantine, everything shut down. I know we have entrepreneurs that are listening right now going, they don't know how you did this. So I just walk me through that mindset of like, we're done here. And we're going to start this, and we don't care what's going on in this pandemic. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to move forward with our plan. Walk me through that moment in time with the two of you.
Well, I think you kind of just summarized it right there. We said, we're done. We're moving on from here. The decision was already made, and it was all preparation. This was 2 years in the making, and a lot of whiteboard time. So you're going to hear me refer to that a lot. Yeah. We're both very visual people, so we need to draw it out. And there was just a lot of conversations of, if we wanted to build this unbelievable organization, what would we want it to look like 10 years from now? And we just started to back our way into it, and we just understood what we ultimately wanted it to be able to look like. And we had to vet, was the existing place where we were the ultimate platform that allowed us to do that.
Right.
And I think once we were able to answer that it wasn't, it was just a matter of time. And I think what we did as a very good job is be very patient with it. And I think ultimately entrepreneurs have a tendency to be of two extremes, too quick or way too slow. And I think out of the relationship here, have a tendency to be the quick one. George has a tendency to slow me down a little bit. And I think that COVID wasn't even really going on in our mind. It was like all this noise was just muted, and we were crystal clear. And it was just a matter of, all right, we need to make sure we execute on every little thing that we need to do. And then it's our team. They were unbelievable through this whole thing, working remote, and us calling them at crazy hours at night and emails and doing all the things that we needed to do. But yeah, looking back at it was crazy.
So I have a couple questions in there. So going from the start, and we don't have to name names or companies or anything like that, but
Sure.
You worked for a different organization completely, right? And so in that moment, and again, without going down any negative road, but just your light bulb moment. So when you said, I'm done, what was the thought process in that moment of like, I'm done? What initiated that moment of like, this is it? There's a clear line here as to, and it might not even be that I'm done, because you mentioned 2 years in the making, and it's funny. It's like the 10-year overnight success, right? We hear about that a lot.
Sure.
And obviously there was a lot of planning, a lot of conversations. You guys known each other for a very long time. So when was that moment of like, hey, we have something, and maybe be patient, but this is when we're going to execute it? What was the feeling? What was the thought process in that moment before we even get to building out?
That's a really good question, Michael. I would share with you that, because we took our time to really develop a vision that both of us had talked about for many years, I would say like the key moment is in an ever-changing industry of financial services. And we're not to name names, but you either work in a channel where it's an insurance company, a bank, an independent investment advisory firm, or you're kind of really on your own. With the changes, we didn't feel like the company we were with could support that vision. So we were almost not divorced from them emotionally because of those changes, but we knew what we wanted to provide to our clients and the vision that we had just couldn't be executed there. So we were just, to Ron's point, patient with it. I think the light bulb was the beginning of some of those changes, and that probably started, probably 2018, 2019. And at some point, you have more love for your vision than you do where you are currently.
Well, I think you say that in a quote that I read about you, which is, there's always a plan in motion. You're either executing your plan or a part of someone else's plan, so make the choice. I was thinking about that while both of you were telling me this. I'm going, that's what it is to me, and I want you to jump in here, is it sounds like there was like an emotional moment 2 years ago that happened where you guys were like, you used the word divorce, but like in a way where you were like, there's a separation here of we have a vision for where we want to go, and this isn't it. And emotionally you separated yourself from that and then started going in this other path.
Yeah, I remember the day that my coach gave me that quote. I was sitting in my office. It was a sunny spring day, similar to this, except it's super cold today. The person said that to me. They're like, "You're upset because you're operating someone else's plan," and I digested that for about 60 seconds. I'm like, you are 100% correct.
So what was the feeling right there for you? How did you feel physically?
It was almost, Michael, like a sense of relief. Like, now I know why I've been so upset for a year and a half. And it's not like I was in a bad place or the organization was bad. It's one of the best organizations really in the tri-state area. But it was just my vision wasn't in line with what was going on there anymore. And it's not a positive or negative thing. It was just, wow, I'm the person that wants my plan executed.
Right.
I didn't want to continue to be executing someone else's plan. And it was almost like a sense of relief of, okay, now I know what I need to do to move on. It was either I take that advice, right, and run with it, which is scary and has a lot of, things associated with it, or I sit here and be comfortable with what it is that I'm doing. So that was a pinnacle day for me as a professional. Followed up by, a couple other quotes from the coach that I probably won't go into today about kind of, jacking me up that it's going to be okay if you go ahead and do this.
Right.
But that was a pinnacle moment for me for sure to start living my professional life day to day by executing my plan versus someone else's.
So who was the first person you told about your plan? Your wife, Sarah, or Ron?
Both. Well, Sarah,
It was a loaded question.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
It was an intentional loaded question to go to Ron.
Yeah. My wife has always known my desires professionally. Confide in Sarah a lot about that stuff. There's probably only 2 or 3 other people that knew that, and Ron obviously was next on that list.
Yeah. I speak with my wife a lot about some of the things that I want to do, and to the point where she's like, I'm going to bed now.
We're good here.
I'm going to bed
I think we
now.
both have that problem at home.
It was a loaded question because I'm wondering now, Ron, how did you feel when you heard the news of like, hey, you remember everything we've been talking about? We're starting.
I don't really remember it from a specific day.
Right.
I remember it from like a time period where it was a lot of cloudy thought, and then all of a sudden it was just super clear. And it was like all of a sudden one day, all the pieces just fell. And that's where I agree with George. There was a sense of relief where we get it now. Because through maybe the first 12 to 14 months, it was a very blurred vision. I'm not going to lie. And I think that's probably what most people can relate to. And there was a couple pieces of the puzzle that finally just clicked. And it was just a matter of time at that point. But it was a big sense of relief because when you're stuck in that spot, you feel like you're just spinning your wheels, right? You're going through your motions. You're maybe not waking up as early in the morning as you used to. And I think that charge of energy, like you were referring to before, was there. And that was really at the beginning of 2020. And we just knew we were building something pretty awesome.
Yeah, that what you said there, that cloudiness turned to clarity. I'm interested in that because we have entrepreneurs listening and they might be cloudy right now. And I'm wondering whether it was what George said to you or what clicked for you. How did you navigate out of that? I know you just mentioned it, a little patience, a little time, but what was maybe some specific things that you started doing in those moments where you said, okay, this is how I'm going to get clarity kind of thing, kind of like some action steps that you took?
Yeah, so for me, it was a little bit different just because our roles in our prior world, but I had a lot of frustration at that time, right? It's like if everybody was coming to your vendors asking for apples and all I had was oranges, right? I was like, I know I can just get an apple here and it's what I want to ultimately do. So for me, I couldn't quite see that, right? But once I started to draw it, once I put it on paper, once we fleshed it out, that's where the clarity was like, it's right here. So for people listening, I can't emphasize this enough of just try to write down every piece of what is going through that crazy brain of ours and just get it on paper and blow through a lot of pieces of paper. And once you put them on a giant table, it will pop. And I think the biggest thing for us, it was, okay, great, we have all this stuff that we want to do. Where do we go build it? And I think that was our biggest component from, let's say, 2 years ago when we thought we had a really cool idea to where, wow, we have a company and an organization now, was putting it on paper. knowing exactly what we need, and it was just a matter of where do we execute it.
Right. And so in that moment, right, so again, we're back in COVID stage, and I really like how you said you kind of had the blinders on. You didn't even know it existed out there. I had a very similar experience in what I was doing at the time too. I actually started a podcast during that time period. And part of it was, to be honest, it was because of COVID, because I wanted to try to, I'm also a board member of the New Pulse Chamber, and I was like, I felt bad for my community, and I was like, how can I help them? And so that was more of a marketing type of podcast. It was called the Shining Light Video Podcast Show. And it was to market them and show who they are and everything. But I grew out of that experience during COVID. And then I got tapped on the shoulder by USI, 5th largest broker in the country, to come work for them out of that experience. So I had a lot of great things happen to me. So I was very similar to you guys, where I had the blinders on. But there was a world kind of falling apart around us. And so I wonder, while that was happening, because that was a reality. So even though we had our blinders on, there was a reality happening around us. How did you overcome those challenges to be able to go out to, I mean, I'm not talking about the nitty gritty of the LLC and all that other stuff, but I'm saying, how did you go out and start getting employees, getting people to come work for you during this? Because I mean, I was hired virtually, but I was hired by a big firm, right? So they had a big backing behind them. I had no reason to worry or doubt what they could provide. You guys are starting from scratch, and you're telling these people, come work for me, and we're going to be virtual and remote for most of the start of this. How do you do that?
When you frame it up that way, Michael, it sounds really difficult and really intense.
Because George and Ron, I love the fact that both of you say, "Hey, we had the blinders on, and we just didn't, we had a clear vision." Yeah. And I know that as I read all these books on entrepreneurs and all of them, and they're all wonderful, and they all have the same idea: is that I just put the blinders on, I just went straight forward. Yeah. And I think a lot of times when we were talking about at the beginning of this meeting here of entrepreneurs who don't take action, who get stuck and who get depressed really because they didn't take action, it's because it's so cloudy. They don't have the blinders on, or they get the vision, they get the clarity, but they don't know how to execute it, or they see too many challenges and they don't know how to overcome those challenges. And so that's why I guess I'm using COVID as a challenge, but it could be anything. Right? So how do you overcome these challenges?
I think two things really stood out for both of us when we were looking at that. It was clear vision. And it also was, we've both, in different capacities, demonstrated our ability to be leaders. So there was this almost blind faith that, we don't know what these guys are doing. They're kind of crazy to do this, but everything they've done so far has had a really good outcome. And the people around them had ended up becoming way more successful than they were prior to their engagement with George or Ron. So I think that was probably one we had demonstrated in the past, execution of vision and leadership. I think the second thing is, being in an industry that is really big but also really small at the same time. Me in my role as a leader, I always tried to pride myself on treating people with respect, whether they decided to continue to work with me or not. And we were able to bring in some people that I had relationships with, and Ron 10, 12 years ago, back into the fold, that it was just the right time and the right place again to start working together. So I would say it's probably those two things that helped us overcome that. Clear vision, demonstration of leadership. And for the entrepreneurs that are listening, I would say those are probably the two biggest things you can do to have your folks have faith and follow you consistently.
I think one extra thing to add, and I know was a big thing for me specifically, but I can see it for, let's say, someone like my father or the super do-it-yourselfer type of business owners, is just to be able to be very self-aware of what your ultimate role should be. And what I always like to use is, what's your green zone and what's your red zone? I remember in January, February of 2020, when I was on the phone with my business coach at the time, I was going through a lot of internal struggles as this thing was going through. And one of the biggest ones is, hey, maybe I may not be the person leading the charge anymore. In my prior world, I was. And it was having that faith in George to say, hey, I'm going to probably just play a different role moving forward. And that was a big change for me to say, hey, I don't need the one steering the ship every day anymore. And I think for a lot of business owners, they have that challenge to say that they think they need to do everything. But in reality, if you just focus on the things that give you the most passion, the ship moves a lot quicker.
That's interesting you bring that up, because I was thinking about that with the partnership and how you're partners. And so somebody's going to have some strengths in one place where the other person has weaknesses. It's really a great combination where you're able to facilitate each other's needs to better the business. I want to hear more about the partnership, but I want to stay on the leadership aspect for a second, because you brought up leadership. You managed 58 employees down up to 72, and I'm sure you had a fair number as well.
Yep.
And I'm just thinking about that as a leader. Now you were doing that for another company. Yes. And so obviously there were some things that you did right. And without me saying them, I'd like to hear what you guys think you really did right. One of the things I heard in there was relationships. It sounds like you built some great relationships. So as leaders, as managers of people, individuals who are counting on you, what were some of the things, maybe one or two top things that you guys did that you know you did right and really resonated with these people to be able to call on them 10 years later and say, hey, let's come work for me virtually?
Sure. I think from a leadership perspective, like, putting their interests first before yours was always a big thing that I learned early on in my journey as a leader. I think the second thing, specific to really our industry, a lot of leaders were never really good technicians or practitioners of the game. So it was maybe someone that failed. Just take our industry of financial services as an example. They weren't the greatest advisor, so they moved into a role that was a little cushy with some income, and I thought I could be in business for myself, but I really can't be. And typically those leaders never garnered a ton of respect,
right? Because
they never really sat in the chair and did what they were telling other people to do,
right?
So from my perspective, serving people, putting their interests first as a leader, and then actually being able to say, like, I've been in the trenches, or I can go back into the trenches with you right now and be an operator. I think those two things, we garnered a lot of respect.
Right.
And with that respect comes the continuity of, hey, we'll follow you. Like, you've done wonders for my life or my career. Couldn't have done X, Y, or Z without you. So I think that had a pretty big impact, Michael.
Made it
for
easy.
Sure.
Yeah. When you're serving and go back to Tony Robbins, it's the same. It's like, how can I serve you?
Correct.
Yep.
And it's a really big thing. And Ron, you mentioned you lead by example.
Yeah, I think to kind of put it in like a NASCAR term, I think that in the beginning of my career, I was very much of that pace setter, right? I like to say I have pretty good work ethic, and I think that I always led by, I'll roll up my sleeves with you and let's just get this done. And you'll never outwork me. And I think that people looked up to that to a certain extent. And I always challenged people that there's more in you than maybe what you see. But I think leadership styles change. I think as the environment that you're in changes, as you mature, it ultimately changes. And I think where there was a shift for me was to learn to let go and to say, I actually trust all the people that I have around me. I trust the person that I've never met in person, but I'm onboarding in a Zoom meeting and they're going to help me transition this entire company. There was trust there, and there was a lot of open communication there. And I think once you can get to that point, you can really see that individual that you're helping mentor really thrive. And I think that's ultimately why we want to do this.
Yeah. That's really cool. I'm thinking about, when you're saying onboarding, I'm thinking about the hiring process.
Yeah.
And that there's another really challenging part of hiring people, but I think is probably the very first step in hiring somebody. What is it that you look for in terms of quality? So we have entrepreneurs, we have business leaders out there who are either hiring people for a company, but even more so for their own company. And we talked about this before about, putting together a cash flow and saying, is this employee worth it or not worth it? Or can I hire this person, or I can't afford not to hire this person? What's something as leaders that you guys are, what's something that you look for in an employee to help with what you just said when you're onboarding them, and this person's going to help change the trajectory of my company? What is it that like sticks out? Because I know you don't hold academics.
Yeah,
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, we're not big on that, and we were joking around the other day. Is Trivium's not hiring, but we're not hiring, right? We look for good talent, and we'll find a home from them if we see that talent. And the biggest thing for us is personality and grit. We want to know what the family dynamics are like, what brought you to where you are today, what struggles did you have, how did you grow through those struggles? That's ultimately where you're going to see that individual be able to push through some really difficult times in business, and how they handle frustration. And you usually can tell pretty quick that weird X factor that individual has. And it's just like, all right, how do we get that person in a really good spot to grow? And sometimes it's just creating a role from them that you never thought you even needed.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say that for us, it's always been fit and personality, right? So if we're going to be working, 8, 9, 10 hours a day remotely or in person, you want to make sure that there's a click there, right? I think the second thing is, getting back to that vision, like they have to have passion for what it is that you're building, and you want to have that person support that. And, if you call them at 7:00 at night and they have 2 kids running around, they're open to taking the phone call and say, look, now's not the right time, but I will get that done for you. So for us, it's always been those things and the person buying into the vision of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And high energy, right?
Yeah.
High energy is key.
We tend to try and have a lot of fun in the office to create culture and an environment, right? So certainly high energy, because on any given day, the two of us could be shot out of a cannon, and it's a pretty fun couple hours.
So a little bit about culture. You mentioned culture in some of the pre-stuff that we talked about. I'd like to hear a little bit about your culture and how you formulate your culture and how you make it work. And I think in there we could also talk about your partnership because, again, they're both of you might have strengths and weaknesses, and I think you complement each other very well, obviously. And I'm sure that adds to your culture. So culture is something that's spoken about a lot in the entrepreneurial world, but sometimes people don't know how to grow a culture or what is their culture or how to figure out what it is and how to get their employees to buy into it. So how do you guys go about, well, one, what is your culture? And then two, how do you go about to get your employees to buy into it?
Yeah, so culture is like you just said, Michael, a very frequently used word in business or in corporate America. And I think sometimes people just say we have culture for the sake of having culture, right? And when you get down to it, there's really no culture. It's just a bunch of people working together. They punch in, they punch out, and call it a day. The world we came from, I feel, built a really solid culture. I watched firsthand the culture develop, and I also watched the culture, unravel to some extent at certain points, right? So we took firsthand experience watching it, which we took some lessons away from. And Ron and I have very similar values personally and professionally. So it's easy for us to build culture when we view our families the same way, we view our futures the same way, and we view what we want to get out of our professional life the same way. So all we try and do is be ourselves inside the environment on a day-to-day basis and try and find people that are attracted to that. So what we expect and what Trivium's culture is, it's a flexible organization. If you're an employee or working with us, it's a flexible organization where you can feel comfortable to grow your career and support a cause that's going to help business owners and entrepreneurs get to the next level. And I think it's, for us, knowing that we march that march every day, it's pretty easy to find people that are attracted to that.
Right.
It's also pretty easy to say no to people that don't fall into that. We had a really sharp young woman in the office last week and super credentialed and was on paper a really good fit. Just not a fit when we started to talk about culture and what her expectations were. So it just made it super easy for us to get off a business decision and not spend a bunch of money and time and realize we made a mistake 6 months later.
Right.
So that's, kind of our culture and how we apply it. It's been fun putting together a culture for yourself versus executing someone else's culture. I could share with you that's been a really fun 7 months for us.
And something I see on your website a lot is your clients. And Ron, you mentioned it earlier. It's frustrating when I have when someone's coming for apples and I got a bunch of oranges to sell. So I'm sure that your culture is also very client centric.
Yeah, I think if you have the opportunity to see how our new office space looks, it caters to that. We didn't want to have the feel of a typical consulting financial firm where it's, the mahogany desks and the gold trim. We wanted open layout couches where we wanted people to come in, feel like they're sitting in their living room, and let's talk about the struggles that you're going through. And I think that's ultimately to the ultimate question was the culture we wanted to build. We wanted transparency. We wanted the stiffness to come out of what I think our industry has a tendency to bring out.
Yeah.
And I think we did a pretty good job with that.
Yeah, I think when you say couches, it's like, oh, okay, I can sit down and
Right.
and share my story with you, and I don't have to. Yeah, you're right. The mahogany desk might give sometimes, especially for a young entrepreneur who's trying to get out there, like very intimidating. Which is what it's there for.
Sure.
Which is, as from the financial industry, we know that's why they built these desks.
Absolutely.
They're more built for the perception that the person sitting on the other side wants to give, rather than catering the person that's ultimately coming in.
Right.
So they really should feel comfortable when they're coming in and excited to want to come in, not that I'm going to go in and see a place and someone's going to stand next to a TV and tell me what's happening. Let's just talk like two human beings and fix whatever's going on.
Right. So I want to hear a little bit about your clients. So without getting into the specifics of who they are or anything, but
Sure.
these entrepreneurs, like on your website, you talk about pitching, getting your business ready to pitch. So obviously these are entrepreneurs who are looking to get to Series A, B funding and really grow their business out. So tell me a little bit about these entrepreneurs that come in and how you're able to really get them to that level. This is kind of like the Trivium Point part of the
Sure.
of the conversation of like, let's hear a little bit about more of the nitty gritty of the business a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think when you take a look at the clients that come through our door, they typically fall into one of four categories, right? So you have the business owners that are really in that startup phase that are looking for that hockey stick-like growth rate, overwhelmed, little scatter-minded, Googling every single thing that they can get their hands on, and are really looking for someone to take that crazy idea, put it on paper, and map out how to execute. As you go through that process, you then take a look at the person that is trying to scale it. So maybe a little bit more of a mature company, and they've hit that plateau, and they say, I still have some energy in me, and I'm ready to take this thing to the next level. I just have no idea how to do that. Then you start to take the next level, which is probably more like my father, where he's like, hey, listen, I put my sweat and equity in this thing. I actually want to go golfing on a Thursday for the first time. I just can't let that go. Right? I can't put that phone away for even 2 seconds. I feel like I need to have my hands on every single project. I think ultimately the pinnacle that most business owners try to get to is that, be able to be that succession point where I'm ready to actually hand the keys over to someone.
Yeah. And staying on that for a second with what you just said about your dad, there was a quote, well, not a quote, but what you wrote in your bio, Ron. You had some touching things too, but I almost had a tear in my eye with one of yours, which was, so we were talking about, what do you see this business in 10 years? And you said, I built this business over the course of 10 years, which we aren't there yet, everyone who's listening, but I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but because he's talking about his dad playing golf, I'm thinking about this, and built this business and didn't miss a bedtime. And I'm thinking about you've brought your dad up a lot, and I kind of want to just circle back to family life again and back to our childhoods here of the impact that your dad had. And obviously that impacts, both of you have talked about your children and making sure you're kissing them on the forehead at night.
Yeah. I think that one thing that COVID taught us is that you can slow down the world and everything still happens fine, right? I think this venture, we were probably, 7 to 8 every day, right? I remember that there was 2 days in a row where I didn't see my daughter at all. I was still home, but I left before she woke up and I came back later. This slowed everything down for us. And I think that if you build it the right way, and whatever your values are, whether it's your family, your friends, your lifestyle, whatever the case may be, there is ways to build your company to be able to cater to that. And yes, maybe on paper, my parents weren't the best entrepreneurs, but my dad's values were ultimately with the family. Right. And maybe that was to the demise of certain things that he did, but I don't think he would ever regret that.
Right.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity, Michael, though, to see some people that are, a few 15, 20 years ahead of me who did the 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and thought that time at work was correlated to their success. And a lot of other things in their life were sacrificed because of that, whether it's family, marriages, what have you. And a lot of them I've had the opportunity to just visually see the outcome of doing that after 15 or 20 years, and I knew I didn't want that to be me. I didn't want to be disconnected from my children. I wanted to be there for them. I didn't want to be disconnected from my wife so that I worked so hard for 30 years, accumulated this wealth, and all of a sudden I don't even know the person that I'm going to go spend the next 25 years with anymore, right? So through some conversations and through some, seeing this firsthand, I knew I didn't want that from my family. So I also think that, because that definition used to be work from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., I don't think that's the definition of success. I think you could very easily create work-life balance if you execute your time properly. And I don't think that that's out of the normal moving forward.
Yeah, I think that that's very important. I think so. For me, this part. So we've been talking for a while now, and when I read that part of like made sure that I was home with my kids and what you talked about earlier on, that was to me like the most impactful part of you guys starting this entrepreneurial journey. Is there's entrepreneurs and even business leaders out there who think exactly what you just said of like, I gotta grind. Kobe Bryant didn't become the best by not grinding, and Gary Vee, he talks about twittering while he's on the beach with his wife, and we see this in social media. We see all of these founders and all of these social influencers who are quote unquote successful, and they're just working their tails off. And so as entrepreneurs or business leaders, we kind of get scared of that success, quite honestly.
For sure.
And we go, you know what? I don't want to be successful. And you start putting those limiting beliefs on, and you start pushing that away because you think that that's the only way. And that's why I think that this was just so important to me to bring up with what you guys said of, you can not exactly have it all, but you can have it all. Like if you want to have a successful business and have a successful family life, and it's like what you just said of like, you just got to make the time for it, and you got to plan for it. You can't just let the business take hold of your life. You have to plan for it. And I really like that you said that about when you meet with your business with these entrepreneurs that come through the door, that you put that plan together of like, where do you want to be and how do you want to do it? And obviously your culture is family oriented. And that's a very important part to all of this.
Absolutely.
I
think sacrifices are a bit in there, right, Michael? So you got to figure out what you're willing to sacrifice. I always said to my wife, if you can make $1 or $1.50, I'd prefer the $1 if it allows me to spend time with my family, and that $1 supports everything that we want to do with our life. That other 50 cents, the incremental work that I have to put in to earn it, there might be sacrifices I'm not willing to take, or that in the future I'm going to wish I didn't.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of that Ron and I have gone through. And I think going back to your point earlier about our partnership, like we both feel that way. So it's very easy for a partnership to operate that way versus if my definition was 6 to 9 and his definition was different, that puts a little bit of stress in our business marriage. So
yeah. And you mentioned another thing there about like making sure that, when you're starting these businesses and it's like, why am I doing it? I want to make sure that when I retire, the person that I married and started this with is still the person I want to be with. And that's, it's huge, right? It's like, I'm sure you have to remind your entrepreneurs of like, remember, why are you doing this?
Yeah, I think the why is always the most important thing. And I think when we started to build this out, that was one thing we were always on the same page with, right? This thing is going to either be something really, really awesome, 20 years from now, in which could provide, some kind of life-changing event, or this is our legacy for George and Will and Ava and Zoe. Ultimately, I think that's what we both want, right? Where we hand the keys over to them and say, this is it. But I think it also goes to the honest conversations that we have to have with our significant others too, right? We both sat our wives down with, couple glasses of wine involved in too, and say, hey, listen, we have something pretty nice going on, but we're going to just throw a huge curveball into this whole thing. And both Sarah and Lauren were, they know our personalities. They say, you guys are going to do great things, and we fully support it.
That's awesome. So I have your curveball question here. About where you guys see it in 10 years. And I'm going to throw a little bit more in there. I'm interested to hear your thoughts because the financial industry is so regulated. I understand that. But technology, there is no stopping technology. There's no stopping what's happening in the AI world. And so when I ask you the question of 10 years, I don't necessarily mean, all right, we're going to be a successful company. Yeah. I mean, look, every entrepreneur in 10 years, we're going to be super uber successful. We're going to have private jets, all that stuff, right? I'm really asking, what do you see the look of your business, the look of your industry in 10 years and the impact that technology is going to have on it?
So the fortunate thing for Trivium is Ron is the guru of software.
Nice.
So the one struggle we have is taming Ron's spending habits with software. But to take your question seriously, Michael, I think you're 100% correct. It's technology focused. The one thing in 10 years that I see us doing very well is taking the output of technology and turning it into the right action for the entrepreneur. because you can get the analysis, you can get the data, you can get all the information, but it typically takes hand-holding to take that into action, right? So that's why we hired business coaches, right? I kind of know where my heart's taken me or what the numbers tell me. I'm looking for somebody to validate it. So I think Trivium is going to do a really good job of understanding what the owner is looking to accomplish, taking technology, artificial intelligence, or whatever it is as a medium at that time, and helping the owner take that action and hold them accountable to it. I think we'll do a really good job of that moving forward, not only on the consulting side, but on the advisory side.
And the underlining word that I hear in all of that is adapting.
For sure.
Is just making sure that you adapt to the changes and embrace the technology. And I think that tees you up right there, Ron, for the technology part.
I just think that, I know this sounds really cheesy, but it's better to work smart than hard. And there are so many tools out there that create efficiencies for people like us, which ultimately give us more time. And if we could take that time to spend more with our clients, then that's ultimately all they're looking for. Clients don't come to us to hit all the buttons, right? They come to us because we know what buttons to hit. And by doing that, we can use all this technology that other firms feel are disruptors and just use them to our advantage to say, okay, we can use this really cool tool to validate something that probably would have took us 2 weeks to do. I can do it in 20 minutes now. And let's give you this information, try to sometimes be between you and the next big mistake, and let's go execute on it. And I think that's ultimately where business owners are, is to say, I'm stuck. And it's usually because they just don't know what to do. So if we can just give you a few options and coach you through ultimately taking that action, I think that's really powerful.
I think to follow that up, Michael, I think a lot of business owners sometimes are afraid to take advice because they feel like they're being sold something. And, if you're in the financial service industry, the business owner market is like the holy grail of the client you want to find or talk to. For us, the technology is going to help us prove analytically and mathematically the decisions that they have to make. So it kind of takes that salesmanship off the table, where it's just like, look, math doesn't lie. Like, your balance sheet tells you to do this, or our tax software just told you these 3 decisions save you X in revenue.
Right.
It kind of takes the salesmanship out of it, where Ron and I really just want to be transparent consultants to them. So it allows us to really be a better version of ourselves in using that technology.
Yeah, we use data at my company as well, and it's the same thing. As I'm an insurance broker, and most insurance brokers have the dark cloud of "let me quote you." And what attracted me to my company, to USI, was the fact that in one of my interviews, I had asked the hiring manager. I said, so what quoting platform do you use? And he goes, if you're doing your job right, you're not quoting. Hey. And I go, what do you mean? And he started showing me they use a lot of data and analytics to be able to look at a risk and say, how do we fix this risk? How do we make it better? And then if we have to go to carriers, we go. But typically, how do we fix this risk through what you just said, the data and analytics? And I think that's huge. And I think that is a big part of the future. Sure. Something I just heard recently was like the old travel agent from the old school days of like the travel agent who just would book the flights is no longer here. But the travel agent who would sit with you and go like, what do you and your family want to do? You want to go, surfing, and you want to do all this expeditions and all this stuff. That person's still here. They still have a job. And that's kind of like financial service, insurance, a lot of industries the same way of technology is going to take some of those jobs away. But the person who's creative, the person who uses the tools to help their clients, they're going to stick around.
Well, one of the things too that's helpful when, like, let's just use the travel experience, is that you're going to someone not to go in and just book a trip, right? You're going to them to say, hey, out of all the other clients that you had that went here, what are the do's and don'ts? So a lot of the times, half of our job is to say, hey, we saw what 100 other business owners did wrong, right? Here's all that experience in a 45-minute meeting.
Right.
And I think that's what ultimately no software or anything will ever be able to tell you.
Yeah, the guidance in there. I do have a question on the software part, because you are the purchaser of software. and I know entrepreneurs and business leaders alike get pitched by software constantly. I mean, my LinkedIn blows up of these different software, SaaS, IO, and all that other stuff. Yep. And so my question to you, as you got this company, you're starting this company, you have employees to manage, you have clients to manage, but you you also know that technology plays a huge role in your company and in the future of your company. How do you find the time? How do you make the time to meet with these people? And how do you weed out what you find maybe not important to being important?
Well, I'm assuming that question is directly towards me.
You are the software king.
when it comes to software, we've spent a lot of time taking a look at what our individuals that work for us do on a day-by-day basis. And we take a look at it saying, what is slowing you down the most, but what provides the highest value of output, right? So if someone is looking at a profit and loss statement, how long is that taking you to get that output? And is there anything that is out there that can just speed up time for us? And then sometimes it's an Instagram thing that pops up because somehow they know what we're thinking.
Of course.
Or on Facebook where I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I was thinking. And then it's a lot of demos. It's a lot of calls. Luckily, George and I's yin-yang relationship is he hates that stuff. So my job is to sit through a lot of these and then say, all right, this is the one. And then it's almost like I have to pitch it to him to give me the green light to move forward on it. But yeah, it's really just time. It's trying to find out where are there things that we're okay outsourcing. And I think for business owners there is a cost both in hard and soft dollars to outsourcing. And you have to find what is the right thing to outsource and what are some things that maybe you never should.
Yeah.
We benchmark the technology decisions on, does it make the enterprise more valuable long term? And is it going to take time, to Ron's point, out of our firm's day to day? And will it provide better information to our clients in a quicker fashion? And if it checks those three boxes, we will argue about the financials associated with the technology, but we typically move forward with it. So that's been our filter. And that's what we would urge all entrepreneurs to look at. Make sure you have your filter.
Right.
Don't just make decisions based off of, oh, it sounds good, or wow, this is going to be great, or 10 other people own this. Like, we have our filter. We would encourage everybody else to have theirs as well.
And do you carve out weekly time to get these demos, or is it more of like on a play-by-play basis of, this solution came up, do we have the problem, or do we have this problem, is there a solution?
It's probably more of a kind of random time, but we do use a specific time every single week where those specific conversations come up.
Right.
So that is usually the time we dedicate towards it. We don't necessarily have a specific budget in mind on how much we should be spending on software, even though he probably wants me to. What we take a look at it and some recommendations we give to owners is that you should have a budget for overall what you should be investing in to help the business. And there are certain metrics that we use. And it should be for X% of whatever your gross revenue should tackle these 5 things.
Right.
And the number is pretty true no matter what size the firm is, and it just has a tendency to work, and that's what we've run with.
It goes back to your execution plan. It goes back to the whole, what's the plan and how do we get this together and move forward and execute on it. It's very important. As we wrap up, something I like to touch on is community and what we're doing in our community, because I feel it's very important to give back and give back to our communities, and I know both of you have done that. So is there any philanthropic work or anything that non-for-profits that you affiliate with or associated with or want to share with us that you're passionate about?
Sure. I think the 2 things that I probably have a tendency to spend some time on is, as I mentioned, we both share a common item here on being the board of the chamber. I've always felt that there's willing to provide a service and willing to serve. That is purely a willing to serve. And what COVID taught us is that was our mantra going through the whole thing, right? So you saw so many people out there that were trying to do seminars for PPP and these EIDLs and, hey, I'll do it for $500, where we said, you know what, let's just help as many people. And the chamber has been a great partner with being able to allow us to help as much as we can. And I think there are just some other personal organizations that I try to do some things on a Saturday to help with here or there, but that's been a big one.
For me, like, my high school experience had a big impact on my life. I went to a private Jesuit high school. My dad said, if you want to go look at private high schools, by all means, go ahead. But public school is just as good. And I toured where I went to high school, and I immediately fell in love with it. I got financial aid to go there because it was pretty expensive at the time. And I'm sure my dad would have figured out how to pay for it if we didn't get aid. But I'm blessed that I was able to get aid and had an amazing experience there. the takeaway from my experience there is, the Jesuit school and mantra is like, you're meant for others, right? And that's probably the beginning of the leadership bone in my body. But I give back to the school monetarily and through time. So that's been a big part of giving back from my world.
I think that bleeds right into the culture, which is what I was asking before. And I think that, your employees and the people that work with you see that. And what you just said there too is like, goes back to what you guys have been saying the whole time of like leading by example and by putting them in front of you. And this is all, the chamber, the school that you came from, it all leads to that. Before we wrap up, I ask each of you individually, whichever one wants to go first, for maybe your top tip, your top 2 tips, whatever it is, for these entrepreneurs and business leaders listening of maybe since you're in the business of helping entrepreneurs start, is maybe along those lines of like, how can you help a cloudy entrepreneur clear the air and move forward? Outside of execution, because we hit that one already.
Yeah. So, it's funny you bring this up because when we were working on one of our blogs, George asked me this question. He goes, let's take a look at all our clients that we thought did unbelievable over the past 2 years, right through COVID and the year leading up to it. And the common theme between all of them were the business owners that were the most self-aware enough to know, I'm not good at this. And they all immediately said, I need to either go hire to it or I need to go outsource it. Every single one of those owners that really took a step back, looked at themselves objectively and said, okay, I'm okay letting go. And whoever they let go to was different in their particular situations, but every single one of those thrived through probably the toughest time the small business owner market could be.
Yeah, and self-awareness has come up a couple times in our meetings. So obviously a huge takeaway is self-awareness, and I know coaching helps lead to that. You both have mentors and coaches in your life to thank for helping get some self-awareness.
Yeah, I would say on my end, Michael, head trash is a big thing.
Head trash.
Yes.
That's a new one for me, head trash. That's a good one.
So I was the king of head trash many years ago. And, walking through mindset and getting some coaching around, like, this actually isn't that bad, right? So we would share with a lot of our clients or entrepreneurs that are out there today, like, don't listen to the head trash and dump the head trash. Because that typically takes you down a path and a road where the vision gets cloudy, you get down on yourself. If you have employees, they're going to notice that. The moment your employees notice that becomes, a virus in the culture. So I would say work through your head trash and talk it out with someone. I know on our day-to-day with some of our clients that are about to make some pretty big decisions in their business and in their life, head trash is a big part of what gets them stuck. So for me specifically, I think head trash has been a big thing.
That's huge, yeah, because, as I said, I read a lot of these books, Ben Horowitz and Richard Branson and all of them. I mean, there's nothing, they're all different. They all started differently. They all overcame different challenges.
Sure.
But the one thing that's huge, and we'll put Steve Jobs here because we know he's the king of this, is confidence.
Correct.
Is just and getting rid of that head trash leads to the confidence, and you got to believe, and you got to move out. I'm going to ask you this question of: do you use any type of mantras or anything to help get rid of that head trash to clear your mind?
For me, I always say to myself, it's not as bad as you think it is right now.
Okay, all right.
And working through that, right? So whatever situation I'm in or whatever presents itself, like, this isn't that bad.
Right.
People have been through worse. And knowing that we have confidence, specifically talk about our business and our vision, we have confidence in it, we have conviction, we know we can execute. Like, I just rely on that. And I try and get rid of the head trash. Some of it's, you can go to that, you wake up every morning, you say your affirmations and things like that. I've never been a big guy about that, more than I believe in what I'm doing, and I have the faith in our ability to execute. And every time I have head trash, I just go back to that.
Nice. And Ron, what do? You just put up 250?
325.
But Ron's in great shape.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Just for our listeners out there.
You know what? To be honest with you, I actually really like the quote of "This too shall pass." I think people have a tendency to use it on the negative side, but I think it humbles you really quick when things are going really good. And I know when we have really good weeks, I try to say that a lot because I'm like, hey, like, it's not always going to feel this great. And when things aren't going right? And it's like everything's going wrong and our office space isn't moving at the pace we want it to, and all the things that can happen as a business owner. It's this too shall pass. And I think it kind of just gives you in check, to George's point, like it's going to be okay. Just keep your head down and just executing on the things that you built.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's really great. If there anything else you guys want to add?
No, this has been a pleasure.
Yeah, this has been really awesome meeting you guys. I got to tell you, I said this to you earlier, but reading your bios was inspirational. Seeing your website and what you guys do for your clients out there is also very inspirational and great. You guys are, I think, doing great work when you're working with entrepreneurs, because every entrepreneur out there has a vision and you're just helping them achieve and reach that vision and that goal. And so to me, it's just amazing work. So I really appreciate it. So the only last thing I'll ask you to do is just plug your site, plug your company. How can people reach you? And then we're also going to put that in the show notes. So just go ahead and do that, just so that anybody who's just listening, they can grab it. At
triviumpoint.com. On there, we've created a pretty unique business assessment for entrepreneurs out there. So if they're a little confused about which stage of the game they're in, we have a pretty short quiz you could take that gives you a little bit of feedback. So I would urge any business owner out there that's curious about kind of where they fall or where their head's at currently to take the quiz.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Michael, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast.